The rain pounded against the windows of my father's hospital room as I signed the contract that would forever change my life. The terms were simple yet devastating. Marriage to Vincent Moretti, the most feared man in the city, in exchange for my father's medical bills and my family's safety. "You are just my wife on paper," Vincent stated coldly, his dark eyes revealing nothing as he straightened his immaculate suit. His voice carried that distinctive Italian accent, smooth yet edged with steel, like expensive whiskey laced with poison. The courthouse ceremony lasted exactly 12 minutes. No guests, no flowers, no rings exchanged. Just signatures on legal documents and a judge who couldn't quite meet my eyes, as if ashamed to be part of this transaction disguised as matrimony. That night, a sleek black car delivered me to the penthouse atop the Archer building, 60 floors above the city lights. The driver handed me a key card without a word, his eyes carefully avoiding mine, as if looking directly at me might incur his employer's wrath. The penthouse was a monument to wealth and power. All marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and furniture that probably cost more than my entire education. Yet despite its vast space, the air felt thin, hard to breathe, as if the oxygen itself was a luxury I hadn't earned. I stood frozen in the foyer, suitcase at my feet, wondering which of the many doors led to my bedroom, surely not his. As if summoned by my thoughts, Vincent appeared at the end of the hallway, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms marked with faint scars. "The east wing is yours," he said, gesturing to the right. "You'll find everything you need there. My quarters are in the west wing. You are not to enter without explicit permission." His gaze traveled over me once, clinically, as if assessing a painting he'd acquired but wasn't sure he liked. "The staff arrives at 6. Breakfast is at 7. I expect you to join me. Appearances must be maintained even in private." I found my voice at last, though it emerged smaller than I intended. "And how long do you expect this arrangement to last?" Vincent's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those obsidian eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or irritation, "Until it no longer serves its purpose," he replied, already turning away. "The master bedroom has been prepared for you. I sleep elsewhere." The dismissal was clear, the message even clearer. I was a business transaction, nothing more. That night I lay awake in a bed built for 2 but occupied by 1, staring at the ceiling as lightning occasionally illuminated the room. I had sold myself to save my family, becoming property rather than a person, and the full weight of that reality pressed down on me like a physical force. I didn't cry. Tears seemed too small for this vastness of loss. Instead, I watched the storm rage outside, matching the turbulence within me, and wondered how long before the lightning struck me too. Days stretched into weeks as I learned the careful choreography of existing in Vincent's orbit without truly engaging with him. Breakfasts were silent affairs, him reading financial reports behind a wall of Italian newspaper, me picking at exquisite food I couldn't taste. The staff moved like ghosts through the penthouse, efficient and invisible except when needed. Maria, the housekeeper, was the only one who sometimes met my eyes, a flash of sympathy quickly hidden, as if compassion might be punishable in this sterile kingdom. I discovered a library on the 3rd day, walls of leather-bound books climbing to the ceiling. It became my sanctuary, the only place where I could breathe without feeling the weight of invisible eyes tracking my movements. Vincent would disappear for days without explanation, returning with new scars or bruises he thought I didn't notice. Sometimes hushed phone conversations in rapid Italian would filter through the walls late at night, urgent and tense, ending in abrupt silence. I learned to read his moods through subtle tells. The tightness around his mouth on bad days, the way he held his left shoulder slightly higher when he was expecting trouble, how he only drank the expensive scotch when someone had disappointed him. Our paths rarely crossed beyond obligatory meals and occasional awkward encounters in hallways. Yet somehow I always sensed his awareness of me, as if some part of his attention remained fixed on my location in his domain, like a predator casually tracking prey. Once I found a book of Italian poetry on my nightstand that I hadn't placed there. When I mentioned it at breakfast, Vincent merely sipped his espresso and replied, "Your Italian is poor. Practice would benefit you in this household." I began finding small artifacts of his life scattered throughout the penthouse. A cufflink under the sofa, handwritten notes in margins of books, a forgotten watch ticking quietly on a windowsill. Each item humanized him slightly, against my will. At night, I sometimes heard him pacing in the room below mine, restless footsteps mapping out whatever caged him more effectively than any prison. In those moments, I almost felt something like connection. Two people trapped by choices made for survival. The most surprising discovery came 1 month into our paper marriage. Vincent played the piano. I found him late one night in the rarely used music room, his fingers coaxing Chopin from the keys with unexpected tenderness, his guard momentarily lowered. I stepped back to leave him his privacy, but a floorboard creaked beneath my foot. His hands froze mid-phrase, shoulders tensing as he turned toward the doorway where I stood. For one unguarded moment, our eyes met without pretense or performance. "Tomorrow," he said abruptly, closing the piano lid with careful precision. "We have an event to attend. My associates need to see that my marriage is solid. Be ready at 8. Wear something appropriate." And just like that, the wall between us solidified once more. The gala was a battlefield disguised as a social event. Men in tuxedos with weapons concealed beneath fine tailoring, women whose smiles never reached their eyes. Vincent kept me close, his hand resting possessively at the small of my back, warm and heavy through the silk of my borrowed gown. "Smile," he murmured against my ear as we circulated, his breath sending an involuntary shiver down my spine. "These people are looking for weakness, for cracks in our facade. Don't give them any." I played my part perfectly, the devoted wife, the elegant accessory, while silently counting exits and cataloging faces. Something in the air felt charged, dangerous. Conversations halting when we approached only to resume in hushed whispers after we passed. The real shock came at midnight when Vincent guided me not back to the penthouse, but to a waiting helicopter on the hotel's rooftop. "Change of plans," he said, his expression tense as he handed me a headset. "We're leaving the city tonight." Wind whipped my hair as the helicopter lifted off, carrying us away from the glittering skyline into darkness. Vincent sat across from me, his face illuminated by the dim cabin lights, speaking rapidly into a satellite phone in Italian. The only word I caught was pericolo, danger. We landed at a private airstrip where a sleek jet waited, engines already running. No explanations, no time for questions as Vincent ushered me up the steps, his body positioned between mine and the darkness beyond, his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, once we were airborne, the city lights diminishing below us. Vincent's jaw was tight, a muscle ticking in his cheek, the first genuine display of emotion I'd seen from him. "Somewhere safe," he replied after a long pause, finally meeting my gaze. "Someone made a move against me tonight. Against us. The penthouse is compromised." The us lingered between us, unexpected and weighted with implications. I slept fitfully on the flight, waking to find Vincent watching me, something unreadable in his expression. When I met his eyes, he didn't look away as he usually did, instead holding my gaze with an intensity that made my heart stutter. Dawn broke as we descended toward an island, emerald green against sapphire water, a pristine paradise far from city streets. A white villa gleamed on the hillside, nestled among palms and flowering trees like something from a dream. "My private estate," Vincent explained as the car wound up the coastal road from the small airstrip. "No one knows about this place except my most trusted people, and now you." The implication of being included in such a select group wasn't lost on me. The villa was open and airy, all white stone and blue accents, with views of the ocean from every window. "1 week," Vincent said as a housekeeper showed me to my room. "We stay 1 week until my people handle the situation in the city. No phones, no outside contact, complete isolation." The last word hung between us, heavy with possibility. The first day passed in awkward navigation of shared space, bumping into each other in hallways, stilted conversation over meals prepared by the skeleton staff. Vincent seemed constantly distracted, checking the satellite phone that apparently was our only connection to the outside world. I discovered the infinity pool on the second day, and was floating on my back, eyes closed against the brilliant sunshine, when I sensed rather than heard Vincent's approach. Opening my eyes, I found him standing at the edge, watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "You never mentioned you could swim," he said, surprising me with this attempt at normal conversation. I sat up in the water, suddenly aware of how exposed I was in the swimsuit I'd found in the closet of my room. That night, a storm rolled in from the sea, violent and sudden as my feelings for this man who was my husband, in name only. Lightning illuminated the villa in harsh flashes, thunder rattling the windows as rain lashed against the glass in sheets. The power failed just after dinner, plunging us into darkness broken only by candlelight and lightning. Vincent appeared with additional candles, setting them around the living room where I had been reading, his movements graceful and precise, even in the uncertain light. "The backup generator should engage soon," he said, settling into the chair opposite mine. Without the buffer of staff or business calls, the silence between us felt different, not cold but charged, like the air before lightning strikes. "Why did you marry me?" The question escaped before I could stop it, hanging in the candlelit space between us. "You could have simply paid my father's debts. Why insist on marriage?" Vincent's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened slightly around the glass of whiskey he held. "Your father owed money to dangerous people even I hesitate to cross. Marriage gave you my name, my protection. It made you untouchable." The storm knocked a branch against the terrace doors with a crash, making me jump. Without thinking, I reached out, my hand finding Vincent's arm in the darkness, the first time I had touched him voluntarily since our courthouse ceremony. He went still beneath my fingers, his skin warm through the fine cotton of his shirt. When he looked at me, something had changed in his eyes, the careful distance cracking to reveal something molten underneath. "I should check the generator," he said, his voice rougher than usual as he rose abruptly, breaking the contact between us. But he paused at the doorway, looking back at me illuminated by candlelight. "You should know, this marriage may be on paper, but my protection of you is very real." The generator remained stubbornly offline, and I made my way to bed by candlelight, the villa creaking and groaning around me in the storm. Sleep eluded me, my mind replaying the moment of connection in the living room, the brief glimpse beneath Vincent's armor. A crash from downstairs jolted me awake sometime past midnight, glass breaking, followed by a muffled curse. I slipped from my bed, heart pounding, and moved silently toward the sound. A heavy vase clutched in my hands as an improvised weapon. I found Vincent in the kitchen, blood dripping from his hand onto the broken remains of a water glass, his face a mask of frustration in the beam of the flashlight he'd propped on the counter. He looked up when I entered, his customary control momentarily absent. "You're bleeding," I said unnecessarily, setting down my makeshift weapon and moving toward him without hesitation. The dynamics between us had shifted in some fundamental way I couldn't articulate, but could feel in the air around us. I guided him to sit, found the first aid kit under the sink, and began cleaning the cut on his palm, a surprisingly domestic moment in our paper marriage. Vincent watched me work, his eyes never leaving my face as I dabbed antiseptic on the wound. "You have experience with this," he observed softly, as I wrapped gauze around his hand with practiced movements. "My father was a construction worker before his accident. Cuts and scrapes were a regular occurrence," I explained, suddenly conscious of how close we were in the small pool of light. His uninjured hand came up unexpectedly, fingers gently tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, lingering against my cheek. "You continue to surprise me," he murmured, his voice low and intimate in a way I'd never heard before. The air between us thickened, as his thumb traced the curve of my cheekbone, his eyes asking a question he wouldn't voice. I answered by leaning slightly into his touch, my pulse jumping visibly at the base of my throat. The kiss when it came was nothing like I had imagined in my secret thoughts, not demanding or possessive, but achingly gentle, almost reverent. His lips brushed mine with careful restraint, as if I were something precious rather than purchased. When we broke apart, both breathing unevenly, Vincent rested his forehead against mine. "This wasn't part of our arrangement," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I tried to keep my distance, to honor the terms, but I can't pretend anymore." Words failed me, so I answered with another kiss, deeper this time, my hands sliding up to tangle in his hair. The careful walls between us crumbled like sand castles against the tide, years of loneliness washing away in the flood. Vincent lifted me easily, carrying me through the darkened villa to his bedroom, where moonlight now streamed through parting storm clouds. He laid me on his bed with unexpected tenderness, looking down at me with wonder. "From the first moment I saw you in that hospital room beside your father, I knew," he confessed, voice barely audible. Paper was never going to be enough. My heart stuttered at the revelation. He had seen me before, had chosen me specifically, not randomly as I'd believed. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, reaching up to trace the strong line of his jaw, newly familiar territory. Dawn found us tangled in each other's arms, the barriers between paper and reality dissolved in the night. Vincent traced patterns on my bare shoulder as sunlight spilled across the bed, his expression more open than I'd ever seen it. "I watched you for weeks at the hospital," he admitted quietly. "Your devotion to your father, your strength despite everything crumbling around you, I couldn't look away." his fingers stilled on my skin. I told myself the marriage was just protection, just business, but I was lying to myself. The satellite phone interrupted the moment, its harsh ring shattering our peaceful bubble. Vincent's expression changed instantly, the vulnerable lover replaced by the calculating strategist, as he answered with a terse, "Moretti." I watched as he listened, his body tensing progressively, the muscle in his jaw working overtime, a transformation happening before my eyes. When he hung up, he was once again the man I'd first met, eyes cold and focused. "Get dressed," he ordered, already moving with swift efficiency. "Pack only what you absolutely need. We have to move. Now." The tenderness of moments before hadn't vanished, but was carefully tucked away, like valuable china during an earthquake. As I hurried to my room, I heard Vincent on the phone again, his voice low and urgent, issuing commands in rapid Italian. The word traditore, traitor, echoed down the hallway, sending a chill through me despite the morning warmth. We were in the car within 15 minutes, speeding down the coastal road not toward the airstrip as I expected, but deeper into the island's interior. Vincent drove with one hand, the other holding a gun resting casually on his thigh, as if it belonged there as naturally as his watch. "Someone betrayed our location," he finally explained as we took a narrow dirt road hidden behind dense foliage. "The same people who came after us in the city. They found the island." His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "There's only one person who knew we were here." The dirt road ended at what appeared to be an abandoned fishing village, weathered wooden structures facing a hidden cove where a sleek speedboat waited. Vincent scanned the tree line continuously as we approached, his body positioned between me and any potential threat. Vincent pulled a waterproof bag from beneath a loose floorboard in one of the abandoned shacks, extracting passports, cash in multiple currencies, and a satellite tracking device. "Always have contingencies," he explained, the practiced movements revealing how many times he'd prepared for scenarios like this. The boat's captain, a weathered local man with calculating eyes, appeared silently from the tree line, nodding once to Vincent before beginning preparations to depart. No words were exchanged, just the silent communication of men who understood the value of discretion and the cost of carelessness. I noticed a thin scar running along Vincent's collarbone, exposed as he loaded supplies onto the boat, physical evidence of a past betrayal, perhaps. "This isn't the first time someone's tried to eliminate you," I observed quietly, the reality of his dangerous existence suddenly concrete rather than abstract. "The helicopter is coming," he said, checking his watch. "But they're 20 minutes out, and our unwanted guests will be here sooner." He handed me a small pistol, surprisingly heavy in my palm. "Do you know how to use this?" I nodded silently, remembering weekend trips to the shooting range with my father years ago, a bizarre skill that suddenly seemed providential. Vincent's eyebrow raised slightly, another piece of me he hadn't anticipated. The distant sound of vehicles on the road behind us confirmed our pursuers had arrived. Vincent's expression hardened as he positioned us behind the boat's cabin for cover. "Stay low, stay behind me, and if anything happens to me, take the boat and head east. There's another island 10 miles out with people who will help you." The first shots came as a distant helicopter appeared on the horizon, too far to help us yet. Bullets splintered wood around us as Vincent returned fire with cold precision, his face a mask of lethal concentration. I crouched behind him, the gun steady in my hands despite the fear coursing through my veins. When a figure appeared at our flank, I didn't hesitate. The kickback jarred my wrists as I fired, the man dropping with a shocked expression. Vincent glanced at me with newfound respect before turning back to the firefight. "The helicopter's almost here. We need to hold them off 3 more minutes." His shoulder pressed against mine, warm and solid. "You continue to surprise me, wife." The word wife no longer sounded like a business arrangement, but a declaration as we fought side by side. Each shot he took was calculated, each movement efficient, the violence revealing aspects of him I'd glimpsed, but never fully comprehended. When the helicopter roared overhead, rappel lines dropping to the beach, Vincent grabbed my hand and pulled me toward it. "Go," he shouted over the deafening noise. "I'll be right behind you." I hesitated, unwilling to leave him exposed. A bullet grazed his arm as he pushed me toward safety, blood blooming on his shirt. The expression on his face wasn't pain, but fury that they had dared to threaten what was his. And somehow in the chaos, I understood I had become more than a possession. Time slowed as I watched Vincent fight, each movement economical yet lethal, revealing years of training and survival instinct that had shaped him into something beyond the businessman I'd first perceived. This was the reality of the world I'd entered, brutal and unforgiving, yet somehow I wasn't repulsed. The helicopter pilot shouted in my ear, his voice barely audible over the rotor wash. "Mrs. Moretti, we have another aircraft approaching. We can't wait." The way he addressed me, not as the boss's paper wife, but as someone with authority in her own right, registered even amid the chaos. Blood splattered across Vincent's face as he dispatched another attacker, the crimson droplets stark against his skin. Our eyes met across the distance, and in that moment of shared violence and survival, something primal and honest passed between us, a recognition that we had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. I grabbed the rappel line with one hand, still firing with the other as Vincent provided cover. When I reached the helicopter, I turned to see him engaged in hand-to-hand combat with a masked attacker who had emerged from the tree line. The pilot shouted something about needing to take off as bullets pinged against the helicopter's side. I ignored him, keeping my gun trained on the beach, waiting for an opening to help Vincent without risking hitting him. Vincent dispatched his opponent with brutal efficiency, then sprinted for the remaining rappel line as the helicopter began to lift. He leapt, catching it with one hand, his eyes meeting mine through the open door, determined, fierce, and strangely exhilarated. I helped pull him inside as we rose higher, bullets still tracking our ascent. Blood soaked his shirt, but he seemed unconcerned, pulling me against him with his uninjured arm, his heart pounding against mine. "You should have gone when I told you," he murmured, but there was no anger in his voice. "I'm not leaving without you," I replied simply, meeting his gaze. "Not anymore." Something shifted in his expression, the final wall crumbling as he realized I had seen the worst of his world and still chosen to stay. "I never saw you as just paper," he confessed, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's rotor. "From the beginning, you were the most real thing in my life. I just didn't know how to deserve you." We flew to a different island, larger and more populated, where Vincent owned a medical clinic that catered to people who couldn't risk hospital questions. The doctor who treated his bullet graze asked no questions, his eyes carefully averted from my presence. "You should rest," I told Vincent as we settled into a safe house apartment above a restaurant in the island's main town. He shook his head, already on the phone coordinating with his people, the betrayal consuming him even as exhaustion shadowed his eyes. I gently took the phone from his hand, ending the call despite his protest. "The empire won't fall if you sleep for 4 hours." I guided him to the bedroom, surprised when he allowed it, his customary resistance softened by blood loss and the day's events. He caught my wrist as I turned to leave him to rest, pulling me down beside him on the bed. "Stay," he said simply, not a command but a request. I settled beside him, his arm curving around me as if it had always belonged there. "When this is over," he murmured against my hair, "we need to renegotiate our arrangement. The terms are no longer acceptable to me." His fingers traced my spine through my shirt, each touch a contrast to the clinical distance that had defined our first weeks together. I shifted to look at him, finding his expression serious yet vulnerable. "What terms would you propose?" I asked, my hand resting over his heart, feeling its steady rhythm beneath my palm. "No more separate wings," he began, his voice rough with emotion and fatigue. "No more pretense. No more paper marriage." His hand cupped my face with surprising gentleness. "I want a real marriage, with a wife who knows exactly who I am and chooses to stay anyway." The following week passed in a blur of security measures and strategy sessions as Vincent's network hunted for the traitor. I remained by his side throughout, no longer the decorative accessory, but an active partner, my observations and insights surprising his lieutenants. We learned the betrayal stemmed from a former associate who believed Vincent had gone soft since our marriage. "Love makes you weak," the man spat when Vincent's team finally captured him. "It gives your enemies leverage." Vincent's response was quiet, but resolute, as he stared down at the captive. "Love doesn't make me weak. It gives me something worth fighting for." His hand found mine, fingers intertwining. "It makes me more dangerous than you could possibly imagine." The traitor's network unraveled quickly once Vincent applied pressure to the right places, not through torture as I had feared, but through the strategic leveraging of information and alliances built over decades. I watched him work with a brilliant tactical mind, piecing together loyalty maps and power structures with devastating precision. One night, as we pored over documents in our safe house, Vincent revealed the origins of his empire, built not through inheritance, but through the strategic acumen of a street kid who had taught himself economics, psychology, and 5 languages. "Everything I have," he confessed, "was created to build walls between myself and the poverty I came from." The irony wasn't lost on either of us that those same walls had nearly cost him the chance at genuine connection. As his organization regained stability, I noticed subtle changes in how he operated. Still formidable and respected, but with a new transparency that earned deeper loyalty from his inner circle, rather than mere obedience born of fear. We returned to the city a month later, not to the penthouse but to a brownstone in a different neighborhood. A fresh start, Vincent explained, away from the memories of our paper beginning. The legal contract that had bound us remained, but it had been superseded by something stronger and more permanent. On our first night there, Vincent presented me with a small velvet box. Inside gleamed a ring I hadn't received during our courthouse ceremony, a diamond encircled by sapphires that matched the ocean where we had found each other. "I don't want just my name on paper with yours anymore," he said, as he slipped it onto my finger. "I want every part of me to belong to every part of you. No more walls, no more distance, no more pretending this isn't exactly where we both belong." Thank you all for following this story. If you're enjoying it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, because your support is what allows me to continue creating these stories for you.